Welcome to the DevReady Podcast. Joining me today on the DevReady Podcast, I have Josephine Dayco. Thanks for joining me, Josephine.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for making the time to have a chat. And so I don't sure anything about your role or title or your history. I'll let you take over and introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'll try to make it short, sharp, and sweet. I'm originally from California. I came to Australia in 2009 through an engineering firm called GHD. They're a global engineering firm. Every time I tell people that, all the girls are like, "Oh my gosh,
The hair straighteners? That's the first thing that came into my head too.
I'm like, no, I wish." But I'll tell a funny backstory about that as well. But we actually had to buy out GHD.com at the time because we were expanding in the States. Anyway, that brought me over here. I was working for on an internal rebrand for the company. We were doing this global marketing refresh, and that took about a little over a year. And after that, I stayed on and decided to take a bit of a career break. I wrote a book, self-published a book. You can find it in the Australian National Library. It's really weird. It's really funky, but yeah, it's just a small poetry about deaths in the Old Testament. After that, I've kind of pivoted into different creative and, I guess, technical industry roles. So a little bit in engineering, research, in the arts, but always having to do with copywriting and comms and translating, I guess, very complicated messages into something that's simple for people to understand. So a little bit fast forward into the 2019 and 2020 COVID era, I discovered a company that a friend, a former colleague, had moved to, and it was a Web3 startup. They were building a game on the blockchain, and everything was kind of new. It was kind of just before NFTs got really hot. I don't know if everyone remembers. Yeah, 2020.
Yeah, $30 million for a picture of a monkey.
That's it. And it was a bit hectic at that time because this game was enabling people to race, own, breed their own NFTs, and they were racehorses. So you can imagine the hype around that. Everyone thought, I think, the company was American because we had partnered with quite a few major brands. It was like Atari, Budweiser, the Melbourne Cup, and Netflix. There were just quite a lot of things happening during that year.
Yep.
Fast forward, that kind of has gone through its cycles. The end of 2022, I think I really wanted to find more women who were in the space and elevate their stories because, I don't know how many people, listening to this are in that space, but it came off to be quite a bit of a bro culture. And there are a lot of bro cultures. I've worked in engineering and it's hard to find women and attract women into the space. So the ones that I did find during that time, I really wanted to try to elevate their stories, have them a little bit more discoverable. So another colleague of mine, she and I were running into the same kind of challenge, and we thought, we might as well just make a website, put something together, make a bit of a gallery, make it easier for people, brands, businesses to find these women. And that's how we started Kalicoo. And so that's our community of women in Web3, metaverse, and AI, and just specifically in Australia. So we're just trying to connect all of those leaders here. And then this year, we've been selected for South by Southwest Sydney, which is great because we're trying to bridge that gap from deep nerdy tech into mainstream consciousness, for them to just be aware of what's out there, what jobs are out there, how you could somehow dive into this space. And my other hat is that I work with a creative technology company called Undeclared, and it's a collective of artists who kind of create experiences, a lot of different creative avenues for all types of industries. So That's it.
That's quite a journey. Okay, imagine that initial move from in 2009, probably right after GFC. I was only, I think, 18 at the time, so I didn't understand it too much. But yeah, if you made that move, and it would have been a bigger hit coming from there to here, and at that time, very tumultuous and probably scary making that move out here. But then seeing how you've been able to probably leverage that very technical engineering background and moving more very creative and understanding that's probably been, let's say, the story of what you've been trying to do over the whole time since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the thing that was so exciting too was I had a mentor in the States who really helped kind of facilitate that and was really encouraging me to just go. It's just a year. Just take, don't
Just one
worry
year.
about it. And I thought, okay, when you're kind of at this, I guess, crossroads in your career and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to go there. And the plan was to move back to the States because we had been going through a lot of different mergers and acquisitions and acquiring quite a few different engineering companies.
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to then, go back into leading and helping with marketing on that side after a year, but I fell in love. Something about Aussies. I ended up staying here, and that was fine too. And my director was like, that's all good. And so just, I guess, being open to that kind of flexibility in the career path and finding your way after that. I was quite exhausted, I would say, from that project, and wanted to take a bit of a break. And my husband was like, look, you don't have to keep doing that. You can pause and rethink, reevaluate, find what it is that you really love doing, and and then move forward from there.
Yeah, having that flexibility to be able to decide, well, I can stay or I just need a break or whatever it may be, is something that is great to have presented to you. So yeah, you're just understanding then what direction do you take and what do you try? Because you probably tried a few different things along the way that you might not have mentioned as well before you settled on the path that you're on.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I would say I always wanted to, during that career break was when I wrote that book. But I've just always gone back to words and writing and helping, I guess, kind of move messages into people's, I guess, into their worlds where it makes sense and it is very clear. Oftentimes, yeah, it's hard to find what it is that you're good at, how you can offer value. And I guess every day I still see it now where I see people trying to get a message out. A lot of brands, a lot of new startups and companies struggle to get their messaging out. And I think we all think we're good at communicating.
Yep.
We have a mouth and we know words and we know how to write. But I can tell you it's very difficult. And, like this conversation, you're extracting information out of each other. You're partnering with someone, you're getting to know someone. So I think having those skills and kind of understanding how you can leverage those strengths in connection, in networking, and really listening. I always joke around that we have 2 ears and one mouth.
Yep.
Need to use these double time. And asking questions, because I think oftentimes we don't pause to ask other people questions and of ourselves as well.
Yep. So there's a bit in that there. Being able to speak and write, everyone can do that. Being able to use those skills for marketing, completely different ballgame. It's marketing for a reason. We try to market, and it's just through time of learning. It's a skill that you have to develop. Again, it's just over time you learn how to do it better and better. And I never thought I'd be the person in the business that we have that would be the person who creates content and writes, because I hated writing in English when I was in school. That's not my skill. But I write articles quite easily, and I can come up with analogies and metaphors and explain things. But that's probably through hundreds of articles that I've been able to it comes out easier. I also don't dwell on things, so I don't try to make them perfect, which is probably the biggest problem that a lot of people in that space have.
Oh, 100%. Because you can nitpick something to death and it will never be finished. I remember a teacher once said to me, writing is rewriting. It never, like, that never landed until way later in life. And I always hated that quote until now. I thought it just never ends because you're always refining, and it would be a little bit like anything you're developing with products, right? You're just, it's always the next iteration. So, of course, V1 is never going to be great, but V20 might be something, and those fundamentals, like you were saying in school, those basics that we all have learned, I think they pay off, and nobody likes to do the boring bits, like reading, research, writing. It all plays into it.
Yeah, you have to enjoy it as well to a degree to be able to then use it and execute on that. So in my journey, I very technical programmer, studied computer science, so games programming as well, and that's what I did. But then with your engineering background and positioning into marketing is a little bit of a skill that I had to learn as well, which is trying to explain the complex things very simply. And that's, how have you found that journey in trying to talk engineer speak or developer speak and turn that into something that you can market and sell to actual customers who can then understand the value of what it's going to do for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, firstly, I have a lot to thank my dad for because he's an engineer, and so I grew up in a home with one first, and I know how they think, and it's very like pause, calculated, not a lot of back and forth. It's very silent, actually, to be honest.
Okay.
And then it's a lot of, us having to extract the information. And once the information comes out, I think, you see the spark in someone's eye when they get excited about talking about a thing. Sometimes the thing they're talking about is, the amount of concrete that gets pumped up into a building, or the amount of copper that's, underground. And you're just like, okay, the community is not going to care about. No one cares about that. What they care about is what the building represents, or what they're going to do in the building, or if that piece of infrastructure is helping, promote something of benefit.
It's the value they derive from the end product.
That's it. And so it's really putting yourself in the other person's shoes, asking the questions. And so I think there's still value in having all of those quite detailed, what I classify the nerdy details, where it's all of the stats and things.
The spec sheet.
The spec sheet. The fact sheets. The fact sheets and the, what do we call them? The capability statements. And it's like, the amount you're full of them. Everyone knows your experience. That's why they came to you, right? They're not coming to you because they don't trust you. They just need a simple solution. So if you're able to demonstrate, hey, we build all of this really technical stuff in the background, you don't have to worry about it. We're just your solution for reaching whatever their goals are. And so it's understanding what your client's goals are, what they're trying to achieve, who their audience is. Maybe it's who your business wants to reach as well. Sometimes it's not, and then the alignment's a little bit off. So it's really about that kind of understanding yourself, which then comes back into a brand question of which we also kind of love to dig into with people, is asking them, do you have a very strong identity for your company? Do you know what you want? Do you know who you're trying to attract? And then finding the clients that you want to work with. Otherwise, you might just start attracting people that you're not necessarily wanting to do work for or collaborate with. Yeah.
You can't just throw anything out there. So I think what you mentioned there is understanding sort of the brand you want to represent, but who are the customers that you're trying to target? Because unless you're hitting the mark on what they're looking for or what they understand, it's never going to be, you're never going to be targeting them.
That's it. When I came over I got interviewed for that role to be part of the brand refresh team. One of the questions that my new director had asked was, what is it that you think is a differentiator? What benefit are you going to add to this team? I sat there and I was like racking my brain, and she said, well, for one, you're a woman. And I thought, oh, I just didn't think of that as like a key differentiator. I'm so in the mentality that, I just gotta think like all the dudes around me, and I gotta operate like them, and I need to make space, for myself and be as bro as I can be. And it's like, well, no, if you think of and consider maybe what elements are missing, I think there's a nice balance that you can find and then add that variety into, anything that you're building. There's a lot of consideration that's missing. And I think if teams spent a bit more time thinking about who that end user is, they might build differently.
Yeah, definitely. That consideration it's important just inside the teams themselves. So you may get people like myself may try and dominate conversations certain times, depending on how passionate you are about something or what direction you have. And for myself, I've had to take the time, and I remember reading somewhere once, you should be the last person to talk so you can hear everyone else's opinions first and then give your opinion, because they may change what you're doing. So that's something like giving consideration to what others may think, because they've got different opinions, different viewpoints, that you may think you have an answer or you may have the answer, but those other opinions can influence it and actually improve it. And if they don't, there's nothing wrong in hearing them.
That's it. And, as you're listening, you also gain a lot of insight into what others in the room are thinking. You're gaining new perspectives. You're kind of doing active research, really, just sitting there and paying attention to what it is that people either are hesitant to say or are really passionate about. And I think there's something to that as well. Something that I've seen in a lot of rooms, where there may or may not be a lot of women present. If there is one or two women there, it just depends, right? Sometimes they feel confident to speak up and interject and say and raise their voice. But other times I see this more often, where they're a bit more quiet or reserved and maybe are doubtful or questioning whether they should even say something. I think that's hard if you're not either confident or kind of have that naturally to want to speak up. But for the men in those rooms, I maybe just want to say here, if you're listening, you're a man in that room with the one woman, ask her what she thinks, because it's so important. I think sometimes we forget and we just expect the woman to behave the way that the man is, but she's also just oftentimes thinking things in herself where it's like, is this the right time to say something? She's probably thinking 1,000 things, I can guarantee. Wants to say it.
Thinking very differently.
But, giving her space, I guess, and the platform.
So I think part of that comes down, and maybe overgeneralizing now, but a lot of people say in the development, with the experience that we have, very nerdy. And that's why you're into computers and programming. And I myself am a nerd. But then it comes down to there's probably a split in those sort of people where there's ones that can socialize and talk to people easier. They're not going out of their comfort zone to do that. Then there's the ones that they like to just stay hidden and just do the work and get their heads down. They're like that. And they don't like to talk to people as much. Overgeneralization, but that's the experience I've had from uni to what we do in businesses as well now. So I can host a podcast, but this would be very uncomfortable for a lot of people in the team to do. And that's probably in our space. So coming from the development background, I can go back to uni 20 years ago, and there's 3 girls in a course of 350 students. So there is that intimidation, I'm guessing, as well, because you are in such a small minority. And then when you do get people that are bro and over talk and can dominate conversations and push themselves around, because the rest of the people in the group are very quiet because they are the reserved shy person. It's going to add that other factor to it.
It definitely does. I think what's interesting is, and we talk about this all the time with our networks, of if you see other women in the space, it also encourages other women to then feel comfortable to enter the space, because they'll feel like, oh, okay, all those girls are going to be there. I can show up. It is hard when you're the only person in a room full of, people who just maybe aren't like you. And for that, the ways to practice that, I would say, okay, I love sport. I'm a bit of a meathead. I love I love weight training, so I'm going to take it there. When you're in the weight room, you are often one of the very few girls in the weight room on the weight floor.
Yep.
It's those kind of spaces that you have to get used to being a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit like standing out and being the only person. There are a lot of circles, I keep seeing more and more where there's women in tech groups. There's a lot. You'll find them actually. We try to share them on our platform on Kalicoo.com. And it's great because they can get plugged in directly with all the other female-led organizations and communities where they will feel welcome.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, so many industries, right? Skating, skateboarding. That's another kind of equal one where it's like, okay, when girls enter the scene, they're not wearing skirts and things like that. I mean, they're just skating. Like it's a skill-based thing. Gaming, same thing. It's everyone's online, you're competing. It might be that culture, but there are a lot of girls in gaming.
Yep.
So I think it's that kind of mental barrier where you just kind of need to find what it is that you think you can offer as a point of value and just dive in there, be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
And that's something that you do have to learn. So going to networking events, I don't like interrupting people when they're having conversations, but that's what you have to do. So I end up just walking around a bit until I get close enough to then just chime in or whatever it may be. But I don't like to interrupt conversations and feel like I'm barging in. But yeah, you have to get used to doing that. And if it's in a meeting, just find the time. Yeah. Even if you're male, female, whatever you are, it doesn't matter. It's just find the right time to have your opinion heard, or don't get too argumentative with people. And that's probably the other way to not start a conversation off on the wrong foot.
That's right. I'm sure we've all definitely been at an event at one point or another where someone just comes in with a one-liner that kind of shakes up the whole conversation.
Yeah.
But also sometimes there's people on the, on the peripheral that might not be in a group conversation. Just approach them and find them. Again, it's scary, especially if you are an introvert. But chances are they're just, we're all human, right? So you just up and say
Everyone's
hi.
trying to do the same thing. If you're at an event, everyone's trying to network, but yeah, some people just don't know how, or a bit more reserved, so it takes more time.
It does. It does.
So what sort of challenges have you had in, I know you had the home experience and you said your dad, you knew how to sort of communicate with him, but what challenges have you had in trying to explain those really technical things so the target avatar can actually understand what you guys are actually doing?
Yeah. Oh, it goes through phases, right? So I would say you kind of have to have that initial conversation where you're exploring that. I would say it's like any kind of project that you're developing. You go through the exploration phase with the engineer. So, Anthony probably going to extract something from your brain and be like, okay, well, let's talk about, tell me what it is that you are into. You get to that personal level first so that you're talking to the human rather than the person in the role and what they do. Because sometimes that clouds the whole point of the project, because they will have their own agenda and their own perspective of what drives them and what ignites their passion for talking about this particular thing that they want to market. So it's like, okay, now that I know who you are, what is it that you love about this thing? And oftentimes that's when the spark lights up. You see it switch in their eyes. And all of a sudden they won't shut up about it because you've triggered something where all of a sudden they're able to talk about the technical subject
Yep.
in a way that sounds more human. They don't know they're doing it, but you know that you've flipped that switch for them. So it's like, that's when you have that little aha moment. And then, after that, I kind of break it down and have a look at, okay, well, here's all the technical bits. How do we then, what does that mean for your audience? So why are these technical bits important? And a lot of times it's like, well, they're not. Let's just let's set them aside, but they are for other talent that you're trying to attract, right? So if you want to flex and say, hey, look at what our team did, look at what Anthony discovered, look at all of these great things that we were able to develop with the brainiacs on our team. Cool. We want to keep nurturing that and then attract that next generation to then build upon that and strengthen our company, right? And grow. But what does all this mean for the customer, for the consumer, the client, whoever? That's when you have to take it into that next recipe. And sorry, I'm Filipino. Everything's food. So
That's not a problem. Any analogy works.
I think of launch plans and things like that as baking. Lots of ingredients go into it, and sometimes you need to remove some ingredients because they just don't work with the particular recipe. So you that's when you start adding in the different flavors and you start checking the temperature. You test it. It's going to fall flat. It's not rising. It's great. Let's try it again. Throw that recipe out.
Yep.
And it's a lot of iteration. I think that baking part, a lot of people don't want to spend time on. So they just rush and they just do fast food styles.
Yep.
And it's junk. And then they attract junk. And it's not the people that they want. So spending time in that crafting your recipe, and your recipe might be a similar recipe to somebody else's, and that's okay. As long as you still maintain your own voice. And I think that's where, when we go talk about brand and we talk about values and things like that, those are the drivers that kind of keep the origins of who you are in that and maintain that recipe.
Yeah, how do you add your special sauce? If we're going in that direction, it's you've got your values, your culture, and your philosophy, and then how do you put that through? Because that's going to resonate with some people. In our business, I make a lot of the content and I make a lot of videos. So there may be people who watch them and go, I can't stand this guy's face. I can't stand his voice. I don't want to deal with him. So we're filtering people out who don't want to work with us by what we put out there. So that's a good way to do it. And then baking analogy, I've done several articles recently about barbecuing, how that's similar to making software, testing the temperature, getting it right. But then you can slice it a different way and you can take things out while they're baking. And now that piece of content is for this certain avatar that's in that market. And that's probably something we see with, you've got your general content, how do you align to people, but then you still have to put out those specs for the technical person who resonates with that more, but is in that industry. So iPhone and Galaxy phones, they have their main things, and then they'll tell you, this is the processor, this is how much RAM it has, but that's only for a certain kind of person.
That's it. And there will be like people who are fully into that and deep dive into it. And that's fine. Like, it's great because it gives birth to a whole nother community. And I would say one thing during the peak of all the Web3 crypto blockchain, when that was hitting mainstream headlines, a lot of people, friends, family, like, what are you doing? Like, what is that?
Yeah, they just don't understand it.
Yeah.
You can just right click and save the picture. What do you mean? You have to buy the NFT.
That's it. And so trying to help people understand the value in certain types of technology, I think that's coming. It's always going to be hard because it's always new.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, probably the thing that is common amongst all industries is those business fundamentals or just the basics, the boring, the building daily, whew, nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
No.
It's the boring parts, as you mentioned. So it's the boring, but it needs to get done. And if it's done right, it helps you support everything else. You probably have more of a challenge in the Web3 space because you have to educate on something completely new, not just try and differentiate or provide why should we pick you or how do we provide value. It's what the hell is a non-fungible token? Does that even mean? I barely understand Bitcoin, and now you're telling me about something else. And that's a lot harder when you have to educate a market from scratch.
That's it. And a lot of people, I would say, who was it? I want to say it was Bloomberg. Uh, it was some tweet. And I remember they started trying to release some definitions of what things in the space meant, different acronyms, and they had a glossary. They had attempted this. I want to say it was like 2020 or 2021. And I just thought, oh, that's really cute. Like, it's good that these mainstream media are like trying, right?
Yep.
It's going to take a lot for people to just wrap their heads around. The more simple way I would say is it's providing a lot of ownership, agency, transparency, helping with privacy, and yeah, I think those things are all important for people to get around. And then if they just think, okay, well, those are the key things, then the technology is supporting all of that. They don't need to go into too much detail. They
don't need to know how it's made. I just had a call before, and the person's like, "You don't want to know how the sausage is made. You just want to get the sausage. So you don't need to know the detail." And it's always a challenge when you're dealing with someone who's coming into an industry who's never been in it before. So we work with a lot of non-technical founders, never built software before, so they don't understand. They don't know what they don't know. They don't understand how complicated it is. Same as if you go to a builder. We have volume builders in Australia, which I'm sure you might be familiar with. You go to them because they've done it repeatedly and they know how to put a house together. If you went to go be an owner builder, people see what happens on that TV show, The Block, and they don't, in a very compressed amount of time, trying to do something. But there's a lot of things that have to fall in place to get it done well. So that's why it's difficult to do it yourself. And you need that right partner to be able to explain things to you to make you feel comfortable. And then it's all about that relationship that you have on who you end up deciding to go with in that very competitive space. And that's where that marketing message and that cut through that you've been mentioning is so important to get right.
That's it. And even there's so much value in surrounding yourself with the right people. If you have a good coach, again, back to like fitness and things like that, you have someone telling you what you need to eat every day and what training program you need to do, and then checking in on you and being that accountable partner, or just someone who supports your journey. I think that's so valuable. And Australia is great for that. Like, we have so many different startup hubs. One of the first ones that reached out to us was Stone and Chalk. They were just so supportive and, helping us build our community of women in this space and getting them connected. And then we got a scholarship from the Commons, and we were there for a year, able to connect with other businesses and startups in the creative space. So it wasn't necessarily technical, but it was nice to be exposed to other people who were facing, challenges, businesses, whatnot. Who else? Oh, like StartMate. I've had the honor of, being a coach on their women fellowship. So just being exposed to that and helping other women in their journeys and kind of just sharing the pains of what it takes.
And just, helping them get that one step ahead and avoid the mistakes, which is the whole point of this podcast, really. It's how do we share something? I'm sure there's one nugget someone can take away and go, all right, I'm going through that problem now. A bit of advice and just get you one step ahead, because whatever you're facing, you're not the first one to have ever gone through it. So having that support and that coach with that right advice is very important.
That's it. And sometimes people want to come alongside you who aren't necessarily the right fit. Maybe they're trying to extract something from you then. And it's about being sharp enough to kind of recognize that, and also there's so much value in having someone who's older. I think I don't know, that knowledge transfer piece.
Yep.
It's
It,
not happening as
yes,
much as I like.
as I say, if they've gone through the trenches and if they've built a business and you're trying to get business advice, that's the right person. It's not an armchair expert, especially if you're looking at sports. Everyone who watches the game is the expert coach. So and it's with social media, you see a lot more of it. Everyone's an expert and can make money with side hustles and X, Y, and Z and everything they're doing. But how many of you actually do it and not just put on a face for social media or whatever it may be? So it's just get to know the people and understand what you need and make sure they're the right person to work with.
That's it. Where I would say, even like where our startup is now with Undeclared, it's no joke, just above a garage. I'm surrounded. It's above an auto body garage.
Yep.
And every day I see people working every day, doing the basics on the grind. And that's kind of what it takes. It's not, startup life isn't all this kind of traveling yachts.
No, it's not that at all.
Glamour. It's great. It's great if you can reach that point. But at the end of the day, like, what are you doing daily? How are you building? How are you going to execute? Because I get back to your armchair thing. So many people have ideas and it's like, great, but have you actually walked through how you're going to execute and deliver that idea? How many resources it takes, what budget, what time? Have you scoped it properly? And people just don't project plan.
Yep.
Which is also why you need a coach. So
ideas are everywhere. It's how you're actually going to make it happen and execute. The execution is all of it. People say it's like 1% idea, 99% execution. It's probably like 99.99% execution in reality.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to reach out and hear more about you or learn from yourself, how can they do that with you, Josephine?
Oh, yeah. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm just there under Josephine Dayco, and on Twitter, I'm under Daycoism is my handle. That's it.
Cool. All right, and we'll add some of those links into the show notes as well. And once again, thanks you for joining me on the episode of the DevReady Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure.